In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Please be seated. I love this passage. I love this passage on many levels. One of the reasons I love the passage is because Jesus is being so human. What I mean is we all know that He's fully human and fully divine. But I love the passages where you see a little bit of the human side coming out of Him. What I mean is, if you didn't notice this morning, Jesus is a people watcher. That's right. He watches people. And that's what He's sitting there doing in the treasury. And I don't know about you, but I would say probably the majority of us, we people watch too. And that's what I mean. I can relate what Jesus is doing. Don't think about it. If you're at the mall or in different places, I was in Houston waiting for an airplane for a couple of days for delays and all that. And, well, after you've read a book and you've called everybody you know and you've texted everyone, you've written notes that you want, what else is there to do at a airport? And so you begin to people watch, and it's great to watch families and seeing the guy who runs through everybody about to knock them all over just to get to his seat and wait 2 hours for his plane because I guess he wants to be important or something, but seeing people and where they go as soon as they get off the airplane. It's fun to, and after a while you see people and you almost start making up things in your head of, wonder what they're doing here, or wonder where they're going, or where did they come from. And then I remember laughing, and this is just a terrible thing for me to do, but I'm walking by and I see in one of those jewelry stores at the airport, and I see a man buying some very expensive jewelry, and I'm like, what's that all about? So, terrible. It may have been his wife's birthday. I forgot. Probably. Anyway, but we people watch. Think about it. When you're at a stoplight, do you not turn around and look at the person sitting there texting and eating something at the same time, and you're like, how are they possibly driving the car? Even at church, don't we people watch? I know that when I'm up there giving communion and I see people coming up, I see people, whether they realize it or not, just happen to look. They're going, oh, what a nice dress, or wow, they got a haircut, or who's that? I've never seen them before. There's different things that we love. In other words, what Jesus is doing is very human. It's something we all do. So we see Jesus this morning, and He's in the temple, and He's sitting on a bench, and you can almost think about, they're like the benches here on the side, but made out of stone. And Jesus is just sitting back, and He's just watching people at the treasury. And they're the scribes. The scribes, remember, they're biblical attorneys, basically, at the time. They're lawyers at the time. And they're trying to constantly trick Jesus. They're asking Him all kinds of questions. Because the lectionary is kind of slim on this, I'll kind of expand a little bit of what's going on. They're sitting there, and like I said, they're asking lots of questions to get Him. But I can almost see Him, almost if they smoked pipes at the time, they didn't, but almost sitting back and just answering, the kingdom of heaven is like that. And He continues to watch people like they're not even there. And they finally ask Him a question about David, and we hear it in Hebrews and today, the line of David. And what they're trying to kind of trick Him with is the Messiah the son of David, or is He the Son of God? What they're trying to get is, wow, if He's the son of David, a human, think about the inheritance He's going to get. He is going to have the best wealth of all. He will have all the comforts in the world. He will have it made like King Herod. But it's Jesus who says, no, He's actually the Son of God. And again, like He tells the disciples, the Son of God has come to give Himself, all of Himself, for God's people. Again, He will be tortured. He will be killed. He will be put in a tomb. And He will rise again for all people. And they decide they don't have any more questions for Him. And so they begin to people watch along with Him and along with the disciples. And as they're sitting there watching, what they're watching are people coming up into the temple to give an offering. Now, understand in the temple, there are different offerings. And you would have this platform you would go up on. And I've heard them described a couple of different ways, but they would be metal boxes. And then I've heard kind of squared metal boxes, and I think that was at the end, but they would also go up, and they were almost like a trumpet, if you can kind of think of sticking up, where it goes up and it opens up real wide. And if you remember, in Jesus' time, there is no paper money. There's coins. And so when someone goes in, there may be one for the incense of the temple, maybe for repairs of the temple. It may be for priest robes. It may be for the poor. It may be for widows. There's different ones that they would have, and you would pick and choose, and you would go and take your bag of coins and start pouring them in there. And when you have a tube like that, what do you think happens? It's loud. Shh. Have you ever been to a bank or gone to a grocery store where you've taken your coins and you poured them in there for your vacation, and it's loud, isn't it? You can almost hear it throughout the entire place. That's how it was in the temple. And so, depending on how much was given, you would also have somebody who may say something as an announcing. Money has been given to the incense of the temple. Money has been given for repairs, as the person is standing up there and listening. So, the more you want it to be noticed, the more you gave. Because you could sit there and you could go down. Shh, shh, shh. And people would turn around, especially if it was a lot, you know. I mean, and they would turn around and see, wow, who gave that? Well, Jesus is watching this, and he doesn't think there's anything wrong with what they're doing. But what he does doesn't like the comparison, and that is, here comes this poor widow woman. And she has 2 copper coins. And she goes to drop hers in, and what kind of sound do you think it made? Maybe, that's it. No announcement, no noise, nothing. And what we see in some other readings is the scribes are basically kind of like, why is she even doing that? If that's all she, why is she wasting her time? It probably cost her more to get here than it is for what she put in. Why bother? Why waste your time? But Jesus is there with the disciples, and he wants them to understand. You see what she's done? Do you see what she's done? See, the people up there are giving out of their abundance. But this woman is giving her all. Remember what we learned about widows during the time of Jesus? If they didn't have a male heir after their husband died, all they had for power was the money still left. Once the money was gone, a lot of things can expose her to the world. She can be sold into slavery. She may be sold into some servanthood. Someone may come and try to devour her house, in other words, take over the property, and what rights does she have? She can be swindled, and there's nothing she can do about it. And so for her to go and give what she has and give it away, what she's doing is she's giving her whole heart, she's giving her whole life to God. My question for you this morning is, what do you give to God? What is it that you give to God? All of us. Do we give out of our abundance? Or do we give our entire life to Jesus Christ? It's something that we need to think about. After all, I think sometimes we do both. There are times we want to give our life to Christ, and there's sometimes we give our life to the world. And we may jump back and forth. But the reason for most of us that we don't give our whole heart and our whole lives to Christ is fear. It's fear. Fear of not having enough precious time. Maybe fear that my gifts that God has given me, my personality or things that God has given me isn't adequate enough. Sometimes it's fear that I don't have enough money. How can I give any away? Because I need to hoard this. And if you watch commercials today, we're bombarded by fear. Buy gold. You better buy gold, because when the world goes into the toilet, you better have your gold ready. Did you ever think that if you're the guy going around giving out gold, that somebody's probably going to take it from you? Fear. It's fear. And I'm going to tell you that this guy here knows about fear. I have fear all the time, whether I'm making certain decisions, or where is the church going, or my time. Do I have enough time with my family, or do I have enough time for my congregation? Do I have, what happens about the gifts that God has given me? Are they adequate enough? Money? You better believe it. 2 kids in college. You know I'm scared all the time about fear. I know it, and so do you. But there is a story I can tell you that I actually go back to when I pray, trying to give it to God. I told you the story a couple of weeks ago about being with my bishop where I had, 3 years before that, I had given a heartfelt prayer at a bench at Virginia Theological Seminary. And it was something that after all of that prayer, I'm standing in front of the bishop. And if you remember, my prayer was, God, if you've called me, then call me, please. I'll let you take charge. If you're not, leave me alone. I can't take it anymore. And it was standing before the bishop where he was telling me he was sending me to seminary, and I was on my way in the process that I looked over his shoulder, and 3 years later I saw that bench. And I knew that God had answered that prayer. Fast forward 3 years. I am done with seminary, I finally graduate, and I'm now going to be ordained. And I was ordained at the Washington National Cathedral in D.C. And it was absolutely incredible day. I'll never forget it. The band is playing. The lights are on. There's 12 of us to be ordained from Virginia, and there's 3,800 people at this ordination. The place is packed. And so a lot is going on, and I'm excited, and I'm like, wow, it's here, and I'm standing in line because I'm T, so I'm second to last, and everyone starts to go down the aisle. Let me tell you, whether you've been there or not, you may not know this, but the aisle at the National Cathedral is long. How long is it? If you actually took the Washington Monument and took it to the altar and laid it on its side, just the tip would come out of the doors. It's a long ways. And you find out when you start walking that aisle slowly how long it is. But it was my turn. And in front of me we had our flag and our banner from my church, my rector's in front of me, the acolytes are in front of me from my church, and we began to go. And as I'm walking, instead of excitement, it turned to fear. I realized this is a wedding. I'm giving my life totally to God. And all of a sudden the fear really hit. What happens if I don't have enough time for the congregation? Or what happens if I abandon my family because I'm doing so much with the church? What if I don't have enough time for myself or for prayer? What happens if I'm not adequate at prayer? What about God's gifts to me? What if they don't like me? What happens if they don't like my preaching or how I teach? What happens if I forget everything that I've learned from seminary? What happens if we cannot financially make it? These fears started to pound on me as I'm walking down this aisle of the cathedral, when suddenly I'm in front of the font at the first transept. And I held on to that, and the reason I held on to it is I realized I was about to pass out. The reason I was about to pass out, I had forgotten to breathe. I was walking down, and with everything and the fear itself, I actually forgot to breathe. And I, of course, remember saying, don't pass out in front of 3,800 people. But as I stood there for a second and I began to continue walking, I did remember one thing that just began to help me. Is I actually gave my life at my baptism. Sitting at that font reminded me I'd already given my life to Jesus Christ at that time. And that God has been with me. But I continued to fear, and as I continued to walk, we got to the altar itself. And there the prayers began. And I'll never forget to come around and they have you sign a document just like a wedding certificate, saying that you are giving your whole life over to the church. And I remember sitting there going, oh God, be with me. And I signed that, and they go on. And then the bishop began his prayers. And we all had to kneel, and we were bending down. And he was going through his prayers, and he finally asked everyone to the equivalent of, all of you witnessing here these vows today, will you uphold these people who are giving their life to the church and to God? And 3,800 people said, we will. And when they did that, their voice hit that Indiana stone, which was at 45 degrees where we were at, and it shot straight down and pushed us. That's when I knew God is with me. I don't need to fear because God walks with me. I could feel it at that time through all the people that God is there. Do I still fear? Of course. I fear all the time, but I continue to go back and remember that, and I continue to pray. I fear of things of what if we don't do something, and that's the biggest fear of all, is the fear of missed opportunities. You see, in the temple that day, the scribes missed an opportunity. Why didn't they go after the widow? Why didn't they ask her how she's doing? Why didn't they see what needs she had? Could they give legal service to her for free so that she would not lose her home? In other words, God put right in front of them a beautiful opportunity, and they didn't take it. And that's my biggest fear of all, is the opportunities that God gives Holy Trinity by the lake. Will we miss it? I would say for the most part, we have taken each one and we've done something with it. But there are times that we miss opportunities because we can't afford it or we aren't ready for it. But you know what? We're getting there. We're getting there faster and faster, and it's because of all of you. But most of all, it's because of the Holy Spirit being with us here at Holy Trinity by the Lake. Fear. Fear can paralyze us. Fear can hurt us. Fear can make us walk away from God. But prayer is stronger than fear. And that's what we need to start doing when we feel the fear, is to give it to God. Just like in that aisle that day. We need to give our lives and we need to give our hearts to Christ. Know that Christ is there. Know that Christ is near. After all, we know that Jesus is a people watcher. Amen.
Amen.